Hello there, it's Austin. A few months ago, Clawhammer Supply reached out to me with some news that they were developing a new lager yeast strain with white labs. It's called WLP808 Mythical Hammer. They said it was a pretty versatile lager strain that could handle warm pressure fermentation or cool traditional lager fermentation. So to test it out, I figured let's brew a beer each way and try it out. Let's get started. The first beer up to the plate is the Vienna Lager, which we will be pressure fermenting. We'll start out our brew day by collecting our 4.8 gallons of reverse osmosis water, and we'll be adjusting it with the following additions of calcium chloride, Epsom salt, and gypsum. For the fermentables of this batch, I'm using mainly Vienna malt, with a little bit of Pilsner, Carahel, and wheat. With everything ground together, we'll add it to the mash and let it sit for 60 minutes at right around 150 degrees. Once we've given the water a little bit of time to pull all the sugars and proteins out of our grain, we'll recirculate our wort back through the grain basket and then start our boil process. I'm boiling for 60 minutes and adding two separate additions of hops. The first addition at the 60-minute mark is Pearl, and the second addition at the 10-minute mark will be Saaz. After the boil has concluded and we've cooled the wort down to a nice 70 degrees, it's time to pitch our yeast. I'll be pitching one pouch of WLP808 into this pressure fermented batch, which is a little bit of an overpitch considering it's right around 3.5 gallons of wort. After confirming my original gravity was about what I expected, the only thing left to do was attach a spunding valve, set it to 12 psi, and then let the yeast do its thing at room temperature for a couple weeks. As soon as the Vienna Lager had started fermenting, it was time to start the second batch, the India Pale Lager. For this beer, I added a slightly more balanced charge of calcium chloride, Epsom salt, and gypsum to my 4.8 gallons of reverse osmosis water. And for the fermentables, I used pretty similar malts to the Vienna, with the addition of some flaked corn and acidulated malt, also a slightly higher percentage of Pilsner. And other than the malts that are added to the mash, our brew day looks pretty much the same. We mash at 150 degrees for 60 minutes, recirculate our wort, and then ramp our temperature up to boil for 60 minutes. Since this is an India Pale Lager, we'll be adding a pretty decent charge of Centennial hops at the 60-minute mark, and then a half-ounce charge of Cascade hops at the 5-minute mark. Hold on to the other half of that Cascade, though, because we will be adding it as a dry hop addition. After confirming our original gravity, it's time to pitch the yeast. This time, our one pack of WLP808 will be fermenting with a more traditional cool lager fermentation method. This means we'll start it out after yeast pitch at 56 degrees. At the 3-day mark, we will be adding that half ounce of Cascade hops as a dry hop addition. 10 days after yeast pitch, we'll raise the temperature from 56 up to room temperature of about 70 degrees and let the beer finish out there. At this point, it's time to transfer both beers over to their serving kegs and hook them up to our CO2 tank. After a few weeks of conditioning, our Vienna and India Pale Lagers, both fermented with Mythical Hammer, are ready to enjoy. So first off, a thanks to Clawhammer Supply and White Labs for sending me what might be one of my new favorite lager yeasts. Secondly, thank you for naming it Mythical Hammer and not Mjolnir, because I still can't pronounce that. Each of these beers ended up fantastic. To start with the yeast characteristics, even though these beers were fermented under very different circumstances, they both ended up being excellent examples of the style. The Vienna Lager is toasty and malty, but clean and bright at the same time. Whenever I share this beer with someone that's not familiar with the style of Vienna Lager, I usually say it's somewhere in between a Pilsner and an Oktoberfest. I think that description definitely fits this beer very well. I didn't use fining elements on either of these beers, mainly because I wanted to see how the yeast cleared up by itself. And it didn't clear up all that much, but it's also not super hazy. But yeah, definitely not much else to say other than refreshing, great example of the style, and a really enjoyable beer. The IPL ended up with very similar characteristics to the Vienna Lager, even though these beers were fermented in completely different ways. But the hop characteristics of this beer really jump out of the glass. It has great hop aroma as well as front and back end bitterness. I'm really enjoying having this beer on tap as kind of a gateway beer to get some of my friends who are pretty focused on IPAs right now more into lagers. But again, overall, refreshing, great hop flavor and aroma, and a great example of the style. Sometimes the reflection part of the videos can be less interesting when the beers are really good, but I do really enjoy both of these beers, and I'm starting to think this Mythical Hammer lager strain might be more of a staple in my home brewery. Cheers!